So I'm working on lining off the hull here, and so I'm using a thin strip, and I put a reference mark on it. And I want to measure from, I guess, is the bottom edge down, which when the boats flip, of course, it's up, because you have variability with this edge with how much will be sanded off once the boat is flipped and so forth. And so in frame 7, for example, I got roughly a 1/4 inch of overhang here below what's the bottom of the shear, which would be the top, of course, when it's flipped. But I've added another 1/4 inch because the curvature of the frame, once it's sanded, so I made a 1/2 inch. So I'm guessing here, I'm just trying to do that so it allows me to sand off some of this edge once the boat's flipped and so forth. I don't really know how much it'll be sanded, but I'm guessing a 1/2 inch here. And then I did a 1/4 inch here because this is almost flush with that frame, and I'm still adding a 1/4 inch. So I probably will do that for anywhere that it's flush or close to flush. I will subtract a 1/4 inch from this full dimension and then divide that by 5. I'm doing 5 strakes. So I have this strip and with my reference mark, and then what I did is I held it up against the curvature of the hull, and then I make a mark here so you can see each frame. See that? I kind of marked them, like frame 6, for example, went all the way to that farthest mark. And I measure on both sides of the boat because it's not exactly the same. They're close. Some are the same. And then I take the smallest dimension and then subtract a little bit for this edge down here. And then what I do is I take this strip then, after I measure this full dimension and then subtract a little bit for that overhang, 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, whatever, divide that by 5, and then you end up with some weird, some dimensions that are like 24 7/16. For example, frame 7 was 24 15/16. Both sides actually were the same. I subtracted a 1/2 inch to allow for that overhang and so forth because the plywood is overhanging a little bit. Plus I wanted some more because of the curvature once it's sanded. So I end up with 24 7/16, subtracting that 1/2 inch, divide that by 5. But then I use this. So then what I do is I come back to this piece, start with my reference mark, and I use this ruler, which has a finer scale on it. It's actually got hundredths. And I can measure like 4.88 or as close to that as I can get. And then I just go down and I make little tick marks for my strakes. And then I hold this back on the hull, of course, up against the curvature. And then I make my reference marks. And so that should be pretty good. And then basically you do one side and then do the other. And then on this strip, after I'm done with one, frame 7, for example, then I erase the marks. Just make little ticks, erase the marks, and then go to the next one. So that is how I'm doing that. I wanted to describe how I make these reference lines where the frames are. So what I did is I took my laser level, my laser, I set it on the floor, and I peeked underneath and I lined that laser line up with the underside of the frame, which would be the top, of course, after you flip the boat. Line it up in the center, and that gave me the right dimension or direction this way, and then the vertical line would go, and so I marked at the bottom of the boat on the side and the top, and then I draw a line using that thin strip of wood to hold it up against curvature, and that's how I get these lines. So when I line the hull up, or the sides up, what I'm doing is I'm using a vertical line at each frame and then dividing that dimension by 5. In the other video I described how I do that. So then I just wanted to describe how I mark the top and the bottom frame. So that frame is vertical in here. Of course, the boat hasn't moved since I've been building it. So, and I just marked all the frames that way, and then I will draw a reference line from top to bottom, and then my marks for the strakes I put on that line at each frame. And then of course I'll do it at the stem and also at the transom. And these pictures show how I used the laser to mark the vertical lines at each frame. So you can see it sitting on the floor, and I guess that's just another picture of it. And then this just shows, so underneath I lined it up down the center of that frame, and then I was able to mark lines. So then I used this, what I did after with that laser, like I mentioned previously, is I'd make a mark at the bottom and the top, and then I just use this flexible strip to then draw a vertical line at each frame. And then once I have these reference marks at every frame, then I've got some vinyl, thin vinyl stripping that I tack on the boat, just like I did for this. I did this line just to see about what it was going to be before I bought the wood. So these pictures show how I used that thin vinyl stripping that I tacked on the boat. And what's nice about this is it's flexible kind of both ways, so you can make it conform to the boat and make it line up with the tick marks at each frame, and then it'll kind of make a nice smooth transition between each frame. So here's just another picture showing how I ran it all the way from front to back, and actually you can see it's two pieces and you just had to line them up. And I actually used my composite nailer to tack these to the boat. And I did the same on the transom when I basically made the lines in the side match the transom. And this is showing the end result. These lines here, you can see how it turned out. And again, the reference marks at this frame were here, 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 and here. It's a little hard to see them, but just shows an example. And then this shows the other side of the boat with the markings for the planking. And this is showing the markings on the transom.